An older man, 85 years of age, was slapped and knocked to the ground in the middle of the street after accidentally brushing against a motorcycle. No one stood up for him. But 30 minutes later, the entire town fell silent as the truth about him was revealed. No one had expected that the man they thought was a lonely old man was a critical link in a covert power network that once saved the nation from collapse. His silence was the command that reawakened the conscience of an entire society. You won't believe where that simple nod would lead. That afternoon, the cold set in earlier than usual. The sun had barely begun to dip below the horizon when wind began to sweep through the weathered rooftops of Stillwater, a quiet town, old-fashioned, home to family-run shops, a few faded signs, and a main street that hadn't changed much since the 1960s. Every Thursday, around 5 p.m., Chuck Norris would walk home from the community center, along the same path he'd taken for over a decade. He no longer drove, doctor's orders, but really Chuck didn't like being confined in a sealed metal box. His legs, though weaker now, still carried him, slow and steady, across the familiar brick-paved street. Sometimes someone would recognize him, mostly older folks. They'd nod, offer a faint smile. Few younger people knew that this tall, slightly stooped, white-haired man had once been a Cold War-era legendary special operative, but Chuck never cared for any of that. To him, every peaceful step across a street, no bombs, no hiding behind bunkers, was a blessing. That afternoon he stopped by the corner store to buy a pack of chamomile tea, a single white birthday candle, and a postcard featuring a snow-covered forest. His granddaughter, Ellie, was turning 10. She lived in the next city. Chuck rarely visited, but he sent letters weekly, not because it was far, but because he believed handwritten letters were something humanity should preserve, like winter afternoons kept quietly in memory. After paying, he stepped outside. One hand held a small paper bag, the other leaned on a cane. The street was still busy. Laughter rang out across the road from the Rusted Elk bar, where a group of young men gathered. Music thumped from a Bluetooth speaker resting on the steps. Outside, a row of polished motorcycles lined up side by side. Shiny Harleys with gleaming chrome pipes and stitched leather seats catching the last light of day. Chuck paid little attention. He had seen tanks explode in front of him. Motorcycles were just background noise. Quietly, he began to cross the street, walking past the row of bikes. His thick, military jacket from 1982, frayed at the cuffs, still kept him warm. His eyes were set forward, but just as his shoulder lightly brushed a motorcycle handlebar, at the same moment a strong gust of wind made him stumble slightly. It happened. The motorcycle barely shifted. Didn't fall, it wasn't scratched, just a slight tremble. But the sharp smack that followed froze the entire scene for a second. A large hand, fast as lightning, slapped him square across the face. A loud thud echoed off his weathered skin. Chuck stumbled back, lost his balance, and fell onto the cold concrete. Laughter erupted nearby. One man whistled, another shouted, "Watch it next time, old man." Chuck lay there for a moment. No groaning, no cries, just heavy breaths clenched in his chest, hurting more than the slap itself. One hand still clutched the torn paper bag. The candle had rolled toward a storm drain. The postcard was crumpled, its ink smudged from his cold sweat. A thin streak of blood at his lip slowly spread, like the emotions he was swallowing. No one came over. No one asked. Pedestrians hurried past, avoiding eye contact with him as though he were a stain on the sidewalk. Chuck pushed himself upright. His face showed no rage, no fear, just a trace of disbelief. Disbelief at the apathy of a society he had once sacrificed himself for. He slowly gathered the candle and card, placing them back into the torn bag. Blood stained the envelope, but he gently smoothed it out, as if comforting himself. Then he rose, with difficulty. His left hip, injured during Cold War training near East Germany, throbbed. Less than 10 meters away, tucked in a corner of the bar, another elderly man sat. A grey beanie on his head, an old coat, and a nearly empty iced coffee in his hand. He hadn't reacted, hadn't stood, hadn't interfered. But when Chuck sat on the bench by the sidewalk, that man looked up and gave a subtle nod. A nod that triggered something, like a silent detonation. Chuck saw it. He didn't return the gesture. He simply pulled out an old flip phone, opened it, and sent a short message. "It's happened. Street protocol, iron code 7. Then he closed the phone, pocketed it, and sat there like someone waiting for a delayed bus. Nearly an hour later, twilight bathed the street in purple haze. Clouds hung like a heavy embrace over the town. Chuck remained on the bench, holding the torn paper bag, eyes gazing forward into something deeper than reality. A coffee shop door beside the bar creaked open. A young woman in a brown apron stepped out. In her hands, a warm cup and a handkerchief. She walked hesitantly toward him. I saw what happened. Are you okay, sir?" Chuck turned to her, calm. He didn't answer immediately, then smiled faintly. "I'm okay, thank you." She set the cup down beside him and gently placed the cloth on his hand. "I'm sorry I didn't do anything. But I want you to know, not everyone turns away." Chuck nodded slightly, again that silent nod, but it seemed to carry more than words. No blame, no anger, no complaint. Across the street, the bikers began to leave. Engines revved, tires screeched. But the one who had struck him, the blond man with the skull on the back of his leather jacket, remained, smoking a final cigarette. He had no idea that from the third floor across the street, a long-range camera lens had locked onto his face. 180 miles west of Stillwater, in an underground facility cloaked in absolute silence, old CRT monitors glowed faint blue. Maps of dozens of small towns were marked with pins. An elderly woman with silver hair tied into a bun and leather gloves on her hands stared at footage from a compact drone. "Norris has confirmed. Iron Code 7 is officially active." A man at the head of the table nodded. "Teams 3 and 5 stay in position. No weapons drawn, no direct action. All we need to know is, does he want to teach or remind?" The woman replied, "He's still waiting, as always." None of them were current government agents. No badges, no ranks. But each had held key roles in the darkest operations of the past century. And Chuck was the silent symbol of a covert network known as the Dandelion Accord. Quiet, persistent, rooted in civil life, guarding fading values. In Stillwater, as darkness fell across the rooftops, Chuck stood up. His boots tapped lightly on the pavement, but instead of heading home, he crossed the street to a small bakery where a young man was locking up. Chuck waited until the boy finished, then said, "Will you still have the oven going Friday?" The boy nodded. "Yes, sir. Need something?" "A birthday cake for my granddaughter. Vanilla, not too sweet. Could you write her name? Ellie, 10 years old." The boy smiled. "I'll save the best one." Chuck didn't smile. He just gently rubbed his nose. His hand trembled a little, but his eyes were warm. "Thanks, and maybe add something like, 'Love, Grandpa.'" "Of course, sir." Before walking away, Chuck looked up at the sky. The streetlights had just turned on, casting a warm glow over his weathered face. No one knew, but he was counting time. A few blocks away, in what looked like a storage container, an old console lit up. A cassette tape rolled. "Under no circumstances is force to be used until Chuck gives a second nod." A deep southern voice followed, because the first nod is observation, but the second is either a miracle or the end. You choose. That night, Stillwater slept quietly. But on radio frequency 144-4 meet courtesy, an encrypted signal repeated. Iron 7 is awake, observing, Do not engage. From a wooded hill, an old pair of eyes watched the town through infrared binoculars. A retired sniper, blind in one eye, sat in the grass, cradling his rifle like a part of himself. He exhaled slowly. Been a long time, Chuck? The next morning at 6 a.m., Chuck appeared at the local park. He sat on his usual bench and pulled a small piece of paper from his pocket. 4 handwritten words. To live is to win. He smiled, folded the paper. At that moment, a mobile coffee truck pulled up nearby. The driver, a bearded man with dark brown eyes, froze when he saw Chuck, then turned away, not out of fear, but because he knew the game was over. At 10 a.m., the first of several surveillance cameras released the footage. The biker slapping an old man. Clear face, full sound, no edits, no subtitles, no explanations needed. The internet exploded. Chuck? He sat quietly in his backyard, sipping tea, writing to Ellie. Dear Ellie, I hope you'll always be the first to stand when everyone else remains seated, because doing the right thing never needs a crowd. As the sun rose the next day in Stillwater, the wind swept gently through the town's windows, waking the early risers. Like every Friday morning, Chuck was already awake before dawn. He maintained his old military habits. Up at 5, light exercise, tea, and the morning news on his dusty radio. But today, the radio only crackled with static, followed by a low-frequency hum few could recognize. He sat at his desk, yellow lamplight bathing his aged but firm face. In his hand, a weathered note with just 2 red-inked words. Iron 7. No one in town knew what Iron 7 meant. No one asked. They thought Chuck was just a lonely old man who liked to walk and drink tea. But some symbols don't need to speak to be heard. Chuck unlocked the steel drawer beneath his desk with the tiny key he wore on a chain. Inside, no weapons, no intelligence files, just an old flip phone, no SIM. 1 button only, emergency signal. He pressed and held it. A red light blinked twice, then went out. He shut the drawer, put on his khaki coat, adjusted the collar, and left the house. In a nearby county, at a small lakeside cabin, a silver-haired man named Hal was tending to his beehives. Once a jet pilot, retired since 1995, Hal still had the sharp eyes and steady hands of a man who once flew through storms. Just as he sealed the honey crate, a tiny radio in his coat pocket beeped 3 times. No voice, no instructions. Hal looked to the sky, then quietly walked back inside. He opened the drawer beneath the memorial altar for a fallen friend, a combat medic lost in Kosovo. Inside lay a note identical to Chuck's. 2 words. Iron 7. Hal pulled out an old scarf, draped it over his shoulder, then looked toward the horizon, where the first light of morning sliced through the clouds. At the town library, Mrs. May, the elderly keeper of archived documents, unlocked the Class C files room. Heavy wooden doors creaked open, releasing the smell of aged paper and time itself. She moved slowly to shelf 3, compartment 4, and pulled out a thick dossier. Its spine read, Dandelion Accord, Stillwater Branch. She laid it on the table, gently smoothing the cover as if touching a past long unspoken. Inside were dozens of names. Most now vanished. Some are living under new identities, some, like Chuck, still waiting. That morning, Chuck walked into the Moss and Mint tea shop as usual. Though relatively new, the owner, Amand, still brews tea in clay kettles, not tea bags. She was the first person to ask him anything since the incident. I saw the video, sir, from the bar. Chuck wasn't surprised. Yes. You're not going to do anything? He looked at her. Not angry, not demanding, just tired. Do you know, people used to save each other with words. Amanda hesitated. Yeah, I guess. Not really. Chuck sipped his tea. These days they share videos. Few share courage. She fell silent, then pulled a small paper bag from a drawer. I prepared this for you. New chamomile blend. Helps with sleep. I thought you might need it. Chuck said nothing, just nodded, and for the first time Amanda felt trusted. That afternoon, at an abandoned church on the town's edge, 4 individuals met in the shadows. Earth-toned coats, black berets, no badges, no names. When greeting, they raised their hands in a silent D symbol, thumb and forefinger forming a loop, the sign of the dandelion. They didn't call Chuck by name, only said, "Sender is Windiron, protocol verified." Response? No action requested, just witness. Meaning? Someone needs to be seen, and someone needs to know they're being seen. That night, the video was shared on national veteran forums. A small media group run by former soldiers verified the footage and released a commentary piece titled Slap, and the nod that stirred a nation's conscience. They didn't name Chuck, referred only to Mr. X, but those who knew, knew. Thousands of comments followed. He saved us. Desert storm. 87 supply line collapse. We owe him our lives. He fought while we still trained. No one should be struck for the history they once carried for us. The quiet gas station near the state line, a man in dark glasses and a worn shirt was pumping fuel. His phone rang inside the car. He answered. A soft voice on the line. Iron 7 protocol. Need to be seen. Target. Remind society of the man it forgot. The man chuckled. Finally, his turn. I've waited 27 years. Orders? No violence, no direct move, just be there, like we used to. The next morning in Stillwater, no one could explain it, but something felt different. An old woman placed an extra bench beside Chuck's usual park seat, just in case someone wants to sit with him. A group of school kids hung cookies on Chuck's door quietly, without knocking. A retired cop hung a sign in his yard. Respect isn't a privilege, it's a duty. As for Travis, the biker, he started to feel a chill. Not from the weather, but from the stairs. People didn't curse, didn't criticize, they just... He returned to his usual bar, but the bartender didn't pour. We only serve those who don't hit the elderly, pal. He gave a nervous laugh, but said nothing. That night, he found a D scrawled on his car door in marker. Not vandalism, just a sign. And he knew. It meant, I saw you. Inside Chuck's small home, he sat beneath a warm yellow lamp, writing another letter to Ellie, as he always did, but this time the handwriting was bolder, shakier. Dearest Ellie, there will be times when silence feels like the easiest choice, but don't mistake it for what's right. Sometimes just saying a single sentence can stay with someone their whole life. Yesterday I was slapped, for no reason, but also not for nothing. I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I was waiting. And when others began to break that silence too, I knew I wasn't alone. Always be the one who says the right thing, even if you're the only one saying it. Grandpa. He folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. On his desk, the reflection from the lamp shimmered off an old paper marked Iron 7, now carefully folded and stored back in the drawer. No one knew what tomorrow would bring. But that night, Chuck knew he was no longer the man no one waited for. When an old man is slapped in the street and no one intervenes, people often chalk it up as a sad incident and forget it over coffee. But when the man is Chuck Norris, a man deeply embedded in an organization the world's never heard of, nothing is accidental, and nothing is ever forgotten. That Sunday morning, nearly 300 kilometers from Stillwater, in a remote mountain shack nestled on a slope, frost kissed the dry grass and dusted rooftops. Inside, a gentle fire flickered, warming the cabin, where a man named Marcus Trent sat, no coat required. Once the commander of Operation Phantom Echo during the Gulf War, Marcus had been the first to help Chuck build the foundation of the Dandelion Accord. The year was 1984. They named it Dandelion because the flower grows quietly, resiliently, unremarkably, but it is impossible to uproot. They placed their members within society, not in uniform, not in rank, but like seeds, waiting for wind. And today that wind had begun, with a slap on a sidewalk. Marcus received the signal from Iron 7, a code only Chuck could activate. Not for retaliation, but to summon. Not to strike back, but to remind. Look at your society and see who's turning away. Marcus added wood to the fire, then opened a tin box containing a stack of old letters, all from Chuck. To him, Chuck was the moral father of the Accord. None of them had served under Chuck, but they all agreed he was the spiritual anchor, a man who never raised his voice, because when he did speak, entire towns stopped breathing. At the old military archive in Pennsylvania, Carla, a retired volunteer caring for forgotten veteran files, was sorting records when she found the name. Norris, Charles R. Not much. A few yellowing pages, stamped notes, redacted lines. But one final note at the bottom froze her hand. Special note, this individual is not categorized as retired. Status, permanently present in system. Carla had never seen such a designation. Digging further, she found a typed letter. No signature. The man named Chuck Norris does not belong to any unit, but he has appeared wherever morality needed to triumph over action. If you're reading this, remember, he doesn't need a title. He is the principle itself. She placed the file back gently as if closing a door she was unworthy to enter. Back in Stillwater, Travis Dean, the biker, began to pay the price of a raised hand. No bar served him. No eyes met his. At the convenience store, the cashier didn't look up. In the park, children avoided him, not from fear, but because they'd been taught no one should stand near someone who doesn't respect the elderly. At first, Travis got angry. Then, scared, he found a note taped to his door. No one had seen who put it there. It read, "We do not retaliate. We remember." Beneath it, a photo. His face, mid-slap, crystal clear. He began losing sleep, double-locked his doors, closed the curtains, installed more cameras. But what he couldn't protect himself from were the eyes. Eyes that didn't threaten, didn't hate, just looked. He called old friends. No one answered, except one text. From Tank, once his closest ally. "I'm not afraid of being seen with you. I'm afraid of missing the chance to live like him." At a small lecture hall inside the local university, a student group organized a talk titled Moral Responsibility, Lessons from a Silent Man. They screened the bar incident video. Then a black and white photo of young Chuck was sourced from an old military archive. A student stood up and said, "I never served in the military, but today I stand for a man who was struck not just by a hand, but by the silence of an entire society." In the audience, some wept. On Monday morning, Chuck received a handwritten letter. No return address. Sloppy, anxious handwriting. "My name is Travis Dean. I don't know where to start. But would you be willing to meet me? I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just for you to look at me once." Chuck folded the letter, placed it on his desk, and said nothing. But that afternoon he made a call to Hal, the Accord's liaison. Not to absolve, but to show him that guilt doesn't vanish on its own. The meeting took place in a small room at the town hall. No cameras, no police, just Chuck, Travis, and Hal in a thick, quiet atmosphere. Travis lowered his head. I'd used to think old meant weak, washed up. I hated uniforms because my dad died in the war, and my mum died slowly, alone. I didn't know who you were, didn't know what you'd done. All I saw was an old man who brushed my bike. And I acted like a fool. Chuck replied slowly, You don't need to know who I am. You just need to know this. Every elderly person walking the street is a whole life. And you stomped on that life as if it were worthless. Travis's eyes brimmed. I'm in therapy now. I volunteer at the Veterans Center. I don't know if anything erases what I did, but I'm trying to relearn how to see people. Chuck gave a slight nod. You don't need to erase it. Just live in a way that what comes next never repeats what came before. Towards the ends of the civilian population. No pictures. But when Travis walked out, his steps were slower and straighter. That evening, Chuck returned home and opened a drawer. Inside was an old photograph, himself in 1972, standing with 3 teammates outside a burned house in Eastern Europe. In the center, Marcus Trent. Behind them, a line of white spray paint on a wall. We don't shoot. We protect through presence. Chuck smiled. Tomorrow, he'd walk the streets again. But now, the town knew. He wasn't just an old man. He was the quiet father of a system, built not on titles, but on decency. Every town has a rhythm. Stillwater's was slower, smaller, and easily forgotten. But since the day the old man was slapped and stood up in silence, something changed permanently. People began to notice. The change didn't come from speeches. No banners. No movements. It came from small acts. Barely spoken. Just like the way Chuck Norris lived. Unflashy, but impossible to ignore. On Tuesday, a 5th-grade girl named Annie did something that stunned her entire school. She brought a cookie and a folded note to her teacher's desk. Mrs. McNeil, who retired last year, was visiting that day. The note said, Mr. Chuck doesn't know me, but I know he taught me this. Anyone who has lived long has given much. The story spread throughout Stillwater. Within 2 days, every retired teacher received hand-drawn postcards from former students. No signatures. Just one line. I still remember you. The local knitting and tea group, Rose Tea and Wool, stopped meeting in homes. Instead, they gathered at the park near the bench where Chuck often sat. They didn't bother him, didn't even speak to him. But whenever he arrived, they'd quietly leave one seat empty, placing a teapot on the stone table. They didn't say it aloud, but everyone knew. It was an apology made of action. At Moss and Mint, Amanda hung a small sign on the door. Free tea for anyone who's ever worn a uniform, for the country or for family. And if Mr. Chuck comes by, don't let him pay. We're returning what was quietly given. Below the sign, a seat was marked. Seat of kindness. No one dared sit there. At the Rusted Elk, where it all began, the owner, Rick, a veteran who'd turned away that day, began to feel the town's gaze. Not accusatory. Worse, silent. Rick had served, but he'd said nothing that day. And silence when you should speak. That, too, is a choice. A week later, Rick emptied the bar, took down the big TVs, turned off the loud music. In their place, he mounted a frame, a neatly folded flag, an old military cap. Below it, a wooden plaque read, I forgot who I was. Chuck reminded me. No one asked him to do it. But from that day forward, the bar's name changed. No longer the Rusted Elk. Now the sign reads, The Quiet Salute. At the old church on the outskirts of town, abandoned for years, something shifted. The floors were swept. The pews were dusted. The cobwebs cleared. The one who began it was Franklin, a once homeless man who had lived on handouts from local diners. He said, 7 winters ago, Mr. Chuck gave me a bag of bread. Didn't ask who I was. Just said, it's cold, eat this. No one's born to fall forever. Today I clean this church, to clean the indifference inside me. A week later, the church reopened for a community gathering. No prayers, no religious rituals, just stories. The theme, the kind person I once turned away. Hundreds came. Each shared a short memory, and all ended with the same words. I saw him when I closed my eyes to others. Yes. Meanwhile, at the local Veterans Hall, older members convened an emergency meeting. Eliza, a former battlefield medic, led the session. She said, Chuck has spoken through silence. This town is remembering itself. We can't let them do it alone. They drafted a plan, not a protest, not a fundraiser, but something quieter, to restore the missing pieces of dignity, one silent presence at a time. They named it Project Standing Quiet. The mission was simple. Each person would stand silently for 15 minutes at a location where Chuck had once walked. Parks, stores, cafes, the library. No signs, no speeches, just stillness. The goal? So anyone passing by would ask themselves, why are they standing there? And in that moment, they'd find their own answer. On day 1, only 9 people stood. By day 3, Stillwater fell into hushed stillness at exactly 9:00 a.m. A man pulled over in the street, got out and stood beside an elderly woman. A teenage girl on her way to school dropped her bike and joined the line in front of the library. A small boy held his mother's hand and whispered, "Mom, what are they doing?" She replied gently, "They're doing something we forgot how to do. They're standing with what's right." That same morning, Chuck went for his usual walk. But when he turned onto Main Street, people were already standing. No one looked at him. No one clapped. No one said his name. But they were all standing. Chuck stopped, did not speak, did not nod. He simply walked through the silent crowd, like a final traveler stepping into a forgotten dream. In the distance, a young boy removed his baseball cap and stood at attention. He didn't know why. He only knew the grown-ups had stopped, and he wanted to do the same. A stray dog, normally a wanderer near the corner store, didn't bark. It simply lay down by Chuck's feet. And at that moment, the town of Stillwater, once turned away, has now turned back. No fanfare, no slogans, just presence. But on Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Chuck Norris had been struck on the street of Stillwater, the town entered a strange calm. No one said it aloud, but everyone could feel it. Something was coming, like a storm whose wind had already arrived. Not cold, but enough to make your spine straighten on instinct. That morning, Chuck rose earlier than usual. He wore pressed khaki, shined black shoes, the pair he reserved only for funerals or truths too big to hide from. He brewed his tea gently, like a ceremony. Then he opened an old wooden cabinet. From it he removed a weathered leather folder embossed with 3 letters. E47, Interno. On the cover, a handwritten note. open only when society forgets who once held it up. Inside were dozens of photographs, not of war, but of people. Bus drivers, electricians, retired teachers, all had once lived like ordinary citizens. But we were, in truth, silent links in the dandelion accord. The final photo was of a woman with short hair, a white shirt, and a camera in her hand. On the back, Agent Lark, embedded in national media, undercover since 2006. Chuck placed the photo down, stood, and stepped onto the porch. A cold mist was beginning to settle. The air was quiet, but not peaceful. He knew today was the day of the second nod. At Stillwater's town square, where the standing quiet movement continued in still rhythmic waves, something unusual happened. A truck with no plates, painted in dull grey, rolled to a stop in the middle of the street. No one exited. No horns. No announcements. Just presence. And the townspeople stopped. From the truck stepped a woman, middle age, slim build, dark jacket, hair tied back. No one recognized her, except Chuck. Standing across the square, Chuck saw her and gave a small nod. The second nod. And the world quietly began to shift. The woman's real name was Rebecca Lynn, but to the dandelion accord, she was known as Lark. Her domain, media and social platforms. Her directive, protect one sacred principle. No one has the right to command public opinion unless they've walked through fire to save another. For 2 decades, she'd embedded quiet ethical regulators into major networks, not to control content, but to awaken trust when society's compass collapsed. That morning, after Chuck nodded, she sent a single-line command. Worldwide XX, no fanfare. But within an hour, over 130 media platforms received an encrypted trigger from System E47, a buried data layer only accessible by dandelion operatives. The results? Chuck's assault video reappeared across trending feeds, not pushed by algorithms, but activated by moral intent. Thousands of trolling accounts vanished, their aggressive histories scrubbed from active discourse. Travis's profile was restored, but with every past message public. His ageist posts, his veteran mockery, his digital trail. No one cancelled Travis. But justice didn't need to erase him to awaken him. It made him face himself. At the town hall, a special assembly was called. Presiding, Mayor Allen, the very man who had stayed silent after Chuck's assault. He stepped to the podium and placed a photo of young Chuck in uniform before him. The room fell still. I was just a boy when Chuck walked past our training camp. Didn't know his name, but I remember. He stopped, handed me a candy, and said, "Grow up and protect the people no one sees." I failed to do that. He still protected me by reminding the whole town to stand tall again. Applause followed. Not loud, steady, and real. That evening, Chuck returned home. On his doorstep, an envelope. Inside, a one-way plane ticket. Destination, Washington, D.C., and a handwritten letter. You no longer need to carry this town alone. But this country still needs someone like you. We invite you to serve as honorary advisor for the Public Ethics Commission. Not for fame, but for foundation. Agent Lark. Chuck smiled. He didn't care for titles, but he understood. Silence only matters if it clears the way for voices that matter. He placed the ticket on the table and wrote Ellie one last letter before the journey. My dear Ellie, I'm going far, but not away from you. I'm going where I can help others remember what's right. Always choose to stand beside the weaker one, because that's where your strength will grow. Love. Grandpa. The next morning, as Chuck left his home, the entire town stood on either side of the road. No music. No flags. No slogans. Just presence. The way Chuck had always given it. As he reached the street's center, a boy stepped forward and handed him a dandelion. Mum says, "This flower's the strongest, because it grows where no one plants it." Is that true, sir? Chuck knelt, took the flower, and nodded. Yeah. And it flies the farthest, if the wind is real. Then he turned and stepped into the waiting grey vehicle. Still water, no waves, no applause, but everyone had changed. That winter came early to Stillwater. The trees hadn't yet finished shedding their leaves when the first snow-dusted rooftops, sidewalks, and worn wooden steps. The cold wasn't sharp, but it was enough to make people walk slower, pull their coats tighter, and look one another in the eyes just a little longer. Chuck Norris was no longer in town. The grey vehicle had taken him away 2 weeks prior, leaving behind only a trail of quiet footprints and a silence no one could quite name. There had been no grand farewell, no final speech, not even a commemorative photo, but everyone knew a new chapter had begun, and its first line had been written by him. Yep. At Central Park, the old bench where he used to sit had been replaced with a new wooden one, carved with care. On the seat was engraved, "For the one who taught us that to stand up requires no shouting, only someone willing to start." Beneath it, a small emblem, a single dandelion etched in fine lines. Simple, but unforgettable to those who understood. Every morning, someone sat there. Not in Chuck's exact spot, the left side was always left empty. But beside it, to keep the warmth, to remember something sacred in the quiet. An old woman brought coffee and set it gently on his side. A child placed a mint candy. An elderly man stood before the bench, arms crossed, said nothing, then nodded. A nod, not of farewell, but of gratitude. At the town library, the long-shuttered archives reopened under a new name. The Quiet Room. It was dedicated to those forgotten by society. Veterans, elderly, the misunderstood, the never recognized. Black and white portraits lined the walls, faces full of stories. In the center, a candid photo of Chuck, not young, not in uniform, but captured in the moment. He bent down to pick up a fallen postcard, blood on his lip, resolve in his eyes. No caption, because no one needed one. As for Travis Dean, the biker, he had changed completely. Since his meeting with Chuck, he has never returned to the bar. Never went back to the old crew. Instead, every Saturday morning, he could be found cleaning the veterans' cemetery. No one assigned him. No one gave him credit. He no longer wore the leather jacket. Now, it was a simple button-down shirt and faded jeans. One day, a boy recognized him and asked, "Aren't you the guy who hit Mr. Chuck?" Travis nodded. Didn't flinch. "Yeah. And now I'm learning to live in a way that makes my apology show every day." The boy looked at his mum. "Mum, can people fix their mistakes with good things?" The mother looked at Travis, then back at her son. "Not always completely, sweetie. But if they keep doing what's right, the wrong thing stops being the only thing we remember." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Chuck made his first public appearance at a closed-door ethics summit titled "Community Morality in a Disconnected Generation." He didn't bring notes, didn't use slides. He just sat quietly, hands clasped. When invited to speak, Chuck rose, straightened his sleeves, walked to the microphone, and said, "We don't have many words. Just one reminder. Kindness is never out of fashion, and silence is not neutrality. If you know what's right, He bowed his head and stepped down. The speech was under 30 seconds, but by the next morning, it had been shared over 10 million times. Back in Stillwater, 1 month after his departure, the townspeople held a spontaneous tribute. No funding, no coordination, just people showing up, each bringing something: a whispered thank you, an old memory, a handwritten apology. Children softly sang the national anthem. Elders stood in rows, no uniforms needed. One elderly woman, holding her grandson's hand, whispered, "He didn't teach us how to fight. He taught us to never abandon what's right, even when we think we're too tired to try." Right before the ceremony began, a mail carrier delivered a sealed envelope. No return name. It simply read, "To Stillwater." Inside, a hand-drawn illustration. A man is sitting in the middle of the street, surrounded by silent people standing all around him. At the bottom, a man isn't a legend because he lives. He becomes one when his presence makes others want to live better. The drawing was printed and placed in every classroom at Stillwater High. Behind the old church, a small dandelion garden had bloomed, each plant representing one act of kindness, written on slips of paper and planted like seeds. No one picked the flowers. Not even the children were playing nearby. Not even the dogs. People cared for the garden as if it held a promise. We saw you. Now it's your turn to see us. In the way we live. One spring morning, Chuck returned to Stillwater. No announcement. No fanfare. He stepped off a bus, carrying only a worn canvas bag and his familiar walking stick. As he passed through Main Street, a teenager sprinted by, then stopped, stared. He didn't know Chuck well, only knew the image from school walls. He stood tall and didn't speak, just nodded. Chuck looked at him. He nodded back, and that was enough. No medals, no applause. Just the knowledge that the silent nod still worked. Since that day, every morning in Stillwater, someone has stopped by that park bench. They sit, or stand beside it, not to accomplish anything, but to keep a place open, for decency to return.